Welcome to episode number 4 of my show, Life of a Potter, where I show you what my life is like. And for this episode, I'm going to show you something that I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for. I'm going to show you how I glaze. And I'm also going to show you one of my secrets. So I start by just glazing everything with a white liner glaze on the inside. And that's because I just think, whether you're eating something or drinking something, everything just looks better with a nice white background. And if you do it right, you get everything on the inside and nothing on the outside. But obviously what makes the pieces really pop is the crystalline glaze. And the crystalline glaze, I always mix it fresh. And the reason for that is because if you don't mix the glaze fresh, some of the materials will basically start to dissolve and the crystal growing potential isn't as powerful. And so you want to mix them fresh so that none of that happens. And then after I mix it, I'll sieve it twice. So a lot of people who use crystalline glazes, when they apply their glaze, they actually use a spray booth, which I don't really like because the spray booths, they take up a lot of space, they're really annoying to clean, and they're just kind of inefficient because you're spraying glaze all over the place. I really like this dipping method because it is a little more efficient in my opinion. And it also gives some nice versatility. Like if I want the glaze to be a little thicker, I can just dip it longer, or dip it again. And it's just such a secure way to make sure that you get a perfectly even coat of glaze on the entire surface. The one thing that is annoying though is I use some gumming agents, and so the glaze stays fluid and drippy a lot longer. But I've just got these old oven racks, and so I just dry my stuff on here, let it drip all at once, and then it's just good to go. Alright, so it's really late, but I've got a bunch of stuff glazed, I've got a bunch of stuff loaded in this kiln, and now it's time for me to reveal one of my big secrets. I'm not using glaze catchers. Let me explain. So for a really long time, when I was doing crystalline glazes, I would make these glaze catchers for every single piece that I did. And this is how every single crystalline glaze potter that I know works. Basically, it's so hard to grow crystals in a glaze that you can't formulate the recipe in a way that allows you to grow the crystals and also have a stable glaze that's not going to run off the pot. So this glaze turns into a liquid, it runs off the piece, and it fills this little catcher full of glaze. And so these glaze catchers, you have to make a new one for every single piece. You don't usually get to reuse them. And on top of that, the glaze catcher is fused to your piece with molten glass. So you have to grind it off and do a bunch of extra cleanup work to make it so that you have a nice clean foot that looks nice and isn't going to cut anyone. I've heard whispers of 1 or 2 potters who are not using glaze catchers, but other than that, I'm the only one I know of who's not using them. And this is one of the main reasons I feel like I have a huge advantage over other crystalline glaze potters. I'd known about crystalline glazes for a really long time, but I never really wanted to get into it because there's so much extra work related to them. And the whole glaze catcher thing, that's just the tip of the iceberg. But as I learned more about crystalline glazes, I started to realize there were a bunch of things that I could potentially do better as long as I figured out how to do them better. But, you know, that's kind of just the nature of the business. I'm sure a lot of you want to know exactly how I went about making it so that I didn't have to use glaze catchers. And all I can say is that it requires a ton of fine tuning. I don't have like a blanket statement like you need to have your alumina at this percentage and your silica at this percentage and everything will be fine. It's going to require a whole lot more fine tuning than just a blanket statement like that. And every single glaze is going to require a different amount of finessing. The one thing that I can suggest though while you are using glaze catchers is you want to make it so that your glaze catchers fit your piece perfectly. And like with this piece, I've made it so that the glaze catcher is the exact same size as the foot of my piece. If you can do this, it'll make it so that you have a near zero loss rate, which is one of the big problems that a lot of people have with crystalline glaze pieces, is that usually they just lose chunks of their feet when they're trying to get the catcher off. But if you throw the piece and you throw the glaze catcher at the same time, you can trim them at the same time so that they just fit each other perfectly. And when you're doing something that's going to require so much finesse to make it so that you don't have to use glaze catchers, you have to have a sense of extreme ownership over every single variable. So just to give you an idea of my kiln setup, it has a thermometer in the bottom, middle, and top section of the kiln, all hooked up to the computer that's built in so that I can program a firing schedule. It'll do that firing schedule and it'll continually take readings on the temperature to adjust to try to execute that firing schedule with the utmost accuracy possible. But even in addition to that, I will still always use a cone pack because the thermometers tell you the temperature of the air in the kiln, but this little cone pack is going to give me a better sense of the temperature of the pots because they heat up at a different rate than the air does, and this cone pack is going to heat up at the same rate that the clay does. The other thing I also have is I stuck an extra thermocouple, aka thermometer, in the side of my kiln, and I have it plugged in to a USB converter that I can run a wire and plug into a laptop that I have in a different room, so that that is creating a graph of what my firing is actually doing. And I'm still looking for ways to upgrade and enhance the ability that I have to basically track and control my firings. So right now I have the industry standard Type K thermocouples, which are pretty good, but I'm in the process of upgrading all of my Type Ks to Type S thermocouples. The Type S thermocouples are a lot more expensive, but they're these really sweet platinum thermometers that give you a much more accurate reading, and they also have much longer lifespan than the Type Ks. And this is basically the nature of the business, where you exert extreme ownership over every single possible variable that you can think of. You need to track those variables, record those variables, and then figure out a way to control those variables with the most accuracy you can. And at this point, the glaze firing that you saw me just load moments ago in this video, it's been about 2 days and now I can unload it. And you'll see that I've got some great crystal growth, no running, and you'll also notice that these are fairly dark. But now we're going to go to another step that's a little bit of a secret, but not as quite as big of a secret, more of like a not commonly known fact, but I'm going to soak these in acid. let me tell you a story about a guy named Ian Childers. Ian went camping. By accident, a few of his glaze tests were submerged in a puddle of Powerade that had spilled in the trunk of his car. When Ian got back, he realized that the color of his glaze tests had been changed by the Powerade. What secret caused the reaction bewildered Ian, but he got to work filling up entire garbage cans of the sports drink and soaking his pots in it for days to get an effect that was absolutely stunning. Eventually, Ian realized that the secret of the Powerade was simply that it was a weak acid, and there were a whole host of weak acids you could use, from vinegar all the way up to muriatic acid, to acid etch the surface of the glaze. This story is only a few years old, but this technique rocked my world. Not only does it enhance the color, brightening it and making it pop, but the acid etching process also solves a problem that has historically plagued crystalline glazes. It helps make them food safe. The acid etching process dissolves all the heavy metals on the surface that would otherwise be slowly dissolved by your coffee, your orange juice. Also, because the surface is etched, you get this cool color-changing magic trick every time you wash and dry your dishes. This technique was still a secret when I learned about it, but in 2016, Ian wrote an article about it in Pottery Making Illustrated and spilled the beans. I like calling this technique the Childers effect to pay homage to Ian. I like calling this story the secret of the sauce. And Ian may tell it differently, but this is the way I heard it. And if you do want to try this technique at home, I would use extreme caution and just use vinegar. Muriatic acid, which is what I use, it's dangerous to use, it's dangerous to store, and it's dangerous to dispose of. And if you do use muriatic acid, you have to make sure that you neutralize all the acid that's still on the surface of the piece, which is why you see me soaking it in those other two buckets. And that's basically everything. I just have a few closing thoughts. One is, this was a pretty big episode for me. It's actually kind of scary sharing so much of my process, but I've just gotten so much great information for free, and I just want to keep that process of giving going. I also want to apologize for this episode being late. As you can imagine, I've been spread out pretty thin. I do all the pottery and all the video stuff myself, and it's just really hard to rush doing a good job. But I know a lot of people really like these videos, so I'll keep trying to do them as regularly as I can. If you want to show some support and be part of the team, definitely consider subscribing and sharing this video with friends. I always need the exposure. And if you really like my work, you can buy it on Etsy. I also have video tutorials, and I just rolled out a Patreon with a ton of cool perks. Links will be below. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next episode.